Hello everyone and welcome. So आज हम एक topic उठा रहे हैं, one that's not just a huge issue for our country, but also, and you'll want to listen closely here, super important for your exams. We're talking about garibi or poverty. So let's do this. Let's break this really complex subject down into simple, easy to digest parts.
So let's just start with a basic question. I want you to think about this for a second. जब आप poverty या गरीबी सुनते हैं, what's the first image that comes to your mind? Is it just about not having enough money? Or, is there something deeper to it? Let's find out together.
All right, so in our first section, we're going right back to the basics. We're going to understand what the actual definition of poverty is, how do we look at it from an academic standpoint, and, well, on a global scale.
Okay, so at its very core, poverty is basically a state where a person or even an entire community just doesn't have the financial resources and essentials for a minimum standard of living. Now, what do we mean by essentials? Well, these are our most basic needs, right? Think roti, kapda, makan, everything you need just to lead a decent life. But, the World Bank, it gives a much deeper definition, and I want you to notice this. It doesn't just talk about low income. No, it says deprivation in well-being. And the most important word here, really, is dignity. So poverty isn't just a struggle for survival. It's about the lack of things you need to live with dignity. And that includes things like education and healthcare.
So just how big of an issue is this in India? Well, here's a number, and I want you to remember this one, especially for your exams. According to the 2011 data, about 21.9% of India's population was living below the national poverty line. Think about that for a second. That's a huge, staggering number. It really shows you the sheer scale of the challenge we're facing.
Now, this might actually surprise you, but poverty isn't just one single concept. Broadly speaking, it's classified into two main types. So, let's take a look at what those two types are.
Okay, now this is a concept that comes up in exams all the time, so let's really focus here. First, we have absolute poverty. This means you don't even have the resources for basic survival. There's a fixed line, like the World Bank's $1.90 a day line. If you're below that, you're considered absolutely poor. Simple. But then there's relative poverty. This is all about comparison. You might have food in a home, but if you're way below the average standard of living in your society, you're relatively poor. Let's use a simple analogy. Imagine the passing score in an exam is 33 and you get 32. You failed. That's absolute poverty. But what if you score 80, which is great, but everyone else in your class gets a 95 and you're at the bottom of the list? Compared to your class, you've fallen behind. That's relative poverty. All right, let's move on to another really important section, especially from your exams point of view. How do we actually measure poverty in India? What's the official procedure for it?
Okay, let's unpack this step by step. First off, the job of estimating poverty falls to a task force of the Niti Aayog. The data for this comes from the National Sample Survey Office, or the NSSO. Now, this next point is absolutely critical. I put a star next to it in your notes. In India, we don't measure poverty based on income. We measure it based on consumption expenditure. So why do we do that? Well, because income can go up and down. It fluctuates, right? But what a family consumes is seen as a much more stable and accurate indicator of their long-term well-being. And finally, the percentage we get from all this is called the poverty ratio, or sometimes the headcount ratio.
You see, the way we measure poverty in India has changed. It has evolved over time. And this timeline of committees, knowing their chronological order, their sequence, is so important for exams. But these aren't just names. They represent an evolution in how we think about poverty itself. It all started with the Alagh committee, which focused purely on calorie intake. Then, the Tendulkar committee expanded that view to include things like education and health, and the most recent one is the Rangarajan committee.
Now, this slide shows the specific numbers from the Rangarajan Committee's 2014 report. And I mean it, please memorize these figures. For rural areas, the monthly per capita expenditure limit was set at 972 rupees. And for urban areas, it was 1407 rupees. These numbers often pop up as direct multiple choice questions, so you really want to have them down.
So, up to this point, we've understood what poverty is, we've looked at its types, and we've seen how it's measured in India. Now, for our final section, let's get into its root causes. The causes of poverty are, well, there are a lot of them, and they're all interconnected. Let's first look at the economic and demographic factors. A rapidly growing population puts immense pressure on resources. When you combine that with low agricultural productivity, rural poverty goes up. Now, add unemployment and price rise, that's inflation, to the mix, and people's purchasing power just plummets. It becomes this vicious cycle that is incredibly difficult to break out of. And it's so important to understand that poverty isn't just an economic issue. There are deep structural and environmental factors at play too. Think about social factors, like the caste system or old inheritance laws. These can really block social mobility. And then on the environmental side, many of India's poorest states, like Bihar, UP, and Odisha, are the very same places that are repeatedly hit by natural disasters like floods, droughts, and cyclones, which just devastate their economies over and over again.
So, as we've seen, it's a complex web of causes, isn't it? Population, unemployment, social structures, climate change, they're all tangled together.